example, though, it seems to me that both of those people were not responsible for the impact of the communication on the relationship. Because the speaker who said, "Are you hungry?" wasn't totally responsible, because she or he, whatever, could have said, "Are you hungry? I am,"
Yes.
which is just clarifies it. And then the listener could have also listened to the question instead of just saying, "No, I'm not hungry, but are you?" So there's
Yes.
on both sides.
Well, that's what Pierce would say. He'd say, we co-create these messes, and someone can start to think differently about it and start to talk differently, right? So if you had two people who were thinking carefully about it, they would find a way out of this before it got escalated, right? To say, what just happened? Why did you say that? I don't understand how that relates. So the episode, the relationship concept. So these are helpful ways for you to take apart conversations that you may get from your problem groups, and say, all right, let's talk about, was there a lack of coordination? There's also, Pierce says, this is part of what goes on when groups are not coordinating. That there are stories that are not meshing well. So Pierce says that there are a number of different stories involved in any encounter between people. He says one of those is the story that you are living. Now, we talked about this under Walter Fisher and his narrative theory, that everybody's living out a story. You got a story about yourself. Who are you? What are you doing? What are these people about? You have a story you're living, and you tell that story to others, usually in a way that makes you look good. So Pierce says, you got to listen to people's stories that they're living. What is this person about? What's the story? Are they a victim? Are they a hero? Are they what's their story that they're telling? Now I begin to understand how I might fit in to this conversation better. So that's one of the things you ask. One of the things that he says is also true is that there are stories that are untold that affect the communication you're involved with. So for instance, in that case of the woman and the man about the food and the stopping to eat with the driving, there may be an untold story in her life of people getting down on her for asking for things. There may be a story that you don't know that's part of the reason she uses that kind of a speech act. So part of what you may want to do as you work with this setting is to say, tell me stories. Was there a time when this happened? When somebody put you down because you asked to stop somewhere. So there may be untold stories that exist. And if those stories are untold, then they are unheard. So it may be told to someone else, but I've not heard it, so I don't know it. So you may think I ought to understand, but I don't understand because I haven't heard your story. So how can I understand until I hear it? So I've got to hear stories that I haven't heard yet, that'll make me understand what's going on here. I think this is very true of political issues. I don't know if you ever listened to Condoleezza Rice or other people, and they will say, well, we did this because this, and this. And all of a sudden you hear a new story that you didn't hear before. And what they do then makes sense because of the story. It was an unheard story before. So you need to think about the stories that people are living out. While we're kind of talking politically here, this gets into the whole thing of terrorism and fanaticism. If you listen to the rhetoric of terrorism, there's a story being lived out. It's a story that goes back, to 700s, and to a large kingdom that existed, and to European powers that broke it up and created all kinds of problems. There's a story that's being lived. That within that story, the communication makes sense. There are stories that are untold. There are things you don't hear about that would explain some things if you heard them. So you need to hear them. There are stories that are also unknown. So Pierce says that there are things that even you don't realize about why you're doing stuff, or why other people are doing stuff. Those stories are unknown. You don't know them, they don't know them, but they're affecting you because they happened. So this might be something that happened to your grandparents somewhere, and you don't know that story, and they've died. You'll never hear that story, but it has affected your family in various ways because of the way they were affected by that story. So Pierce says, you got to pay attention to the fact that there may be unknown stories that are affecting what's going on. And then he talks about stories told, and then the need to tell stories. So if I'm going to coordinate my communication with you, if we're not going to end up shouting past each other, there's all kinds of stories we're going to have to pay attention. You're going to have to listen to my stories, I'm going to listen to your stories. We're going to have to search for stories that we've forgotten and need to tell. Why? Why are all of these things important from Mead's perspective?
Leads to much better communication.
But how are these stories affected your organization, your life? It's part of it. These have created you. So this is why it's important to hear histories. Whenever you go to a counselor, whenever you go to they can say, okay, let's do a family history. What are they trying to do? They're trying to understand the story that's being lived. They're trying to hear some untold stories. They're trying to get at unknown stories. There's something that should explain this. What can we get at? And so once we learn that, we can create a new future. So if you're doing a band or a sorority, you would go, what's the history? What are the stories of what has happened between people? What's the history of the last president, the president before that, the person before that? How did these people come together? Who knows who, for what way? You want to hear those stories. That'll explain what's going on in the thing. So he helps you to do this. He has something he calls the DAISY model. It's sometimes called the atomic model, depending on how you want to do it. And he visualizes it this way. Here you are, and here's the other person. You're having a conversation with each other. So it's person A and person B. And you make a statement, and B makes a statement. And actually, he says you'll go back and forth, back and forth. He's very interested in tracing the flow of the conversation and saying, well, why is this the proper response to this? Why? What's being done here? What's the action that's being done? And he says that you got to understand that when A is talking in this conversation, they're not just talking to you. They're also talking to their peers who may be listening in on the conversation or who are going to hear about the conversation. So it's not just me and you talking, but this is me and you talking with the idea that my friends are going to be listening or hear about this, and your friends are going to be hearing and listening. So there are peers involved. There may be, he gives this example in an article about a judge sentencing a terrorist. This is a 2004 article of Barnett Pierce where he analyzes in a courtroom exchange between a judge and a terrorist who's being sentenced for the World Trade Center bombings back before the 9/11. And so he says the judge is also talking to voters while he's talking to the terrorist. So it's not just, there are always other things involved. So you need to know who else is involved in this conversation. So he says you have a family, his own family he's talking to. He's also talking to the nation. He's also talking to other lawyers in the court. You know, he's also talking to, so every conversation, every statement you make is, and he calls this a daisy mine. It has all these other things that are involved in it. And when he talked to the terrorist, there was also, the terrorist would say things that were related to a performance before peers and friends and political leaders and religious leaders. Right, and others. You can think about it. Now how does this help you make sense of what's going on in an exchange? And why is this part of social, Mead's social self-construction theory? How does this help you understand what's happening in communication?
It just kind of makes you aware that when someone's talking, there's all this other stuff going on in their heads, and they might not be specifically directing what they're saying at you. They might actually have someone else in mind. Like, for example, with the terrorists, even if they're saying something to the courtroom, if there's TV media there, they could really be communicating
they're thinking of saying it
secretly with their buddies back
right.
wherever they are, saying, do this that day,
Right. And so even something as simple as us talking now, for Jason to say that and for me to respond to that, we're both, you've got your peers are listening in, you're thinking about talking to someone else later about the class, I'm thinking about the department, I'm thinking about the responsibility to the school. We're all, this conversation is taking place within a whole other nested bunch of things going on. And that shape it, that say what's going to happen, what's not going to happen in this conversation. And that shape then the kind of relationship and what this classroom is, what we are. All of these things are interacting in shaping it. So this is what Mead says, that we are the product of complex interactions. And Pierce tries to give us handles on that. So he says this. He says, treat all stories, your own as well as others, as incomplete, unfinished, biased, and inconsistent. So when someone starts to tell you, oh, this is what happened, or here's why we don't like the management here, or here's why this part of our group is an idiot, you're going to hear a story. And Pierce says, all right, that's a story told. But there are also untold stories. There are unknown stories. There are unheard stories. There's a lot of other things going on. So treat all of those stories as partial, inconsistent, biased communication. And if you do that, you're going to say, I want more. Okay, that's good. I heard that. I wonder if we could talk to some other people. I wonder if you could tell me more stories. I wonder if we could hear their story, their side of the story. So if you're going to create a new social world, do that. Treat your own stories as local, dependent on your own perspective, history, and purposes. So you should realize your own stories are not the whole story. Well, I'm right. I know what's going on. I know how this is. Well, he says no. Treat stories that differ from your own as valid within the framework of the other person's perspective, history, and purposes. So you ever have someone try to explain something to you and say, you are so wrong. You have that's just not right. When they tell you something. Pierce says, no, slow down. Treat that story as having some validity from that person's perspective. You need to begin to see that that's some way they see it that way. Be curious about other people's stories. I'm curious how your story is so different from my story.
Usually in like that kind of situation, what I always did was I played dumb, like, oh really, that's how you took it? Like, I don't understand. Yeah, like, I just played dumb, like, oh, I understood it as this way, which would in my head is the correct way, and then either their story changes to be that way, or I get corrected on my own, but I just kind of roll over, play dead kind of thing.
Yeah, well, that's a non-threatening way to get some more story out. Yeah. Pierce wants us to be more active than that. He wants us to say, you know, both of our stories are partial. I want to hear your story, I want to hear my story, I want you to hear my story.
No, I just want to say it depends like what mood you're in, I feel like. Because when I'm in like a good mood, I'll be like, okay, I totally see where you're coming from. This is how I feel. But if I'm in a bad mood, I'll be like, are you kidding me? Like, are you retarded? Like,
Yeah. Which is really helpful communication for, you know, I'm sure that goes well. Yeah. So Pierce says, if you can learn to practice these things, you'll change what goes on. So he says, one of the things you can do is develop sufficient self-awareness of the localness of your own stories and treat other people's stories with curiosity and respect.
How many values are there?
There's a couple. I can send them to you.
No, that's all right.
Well, we'll just go through them.
It's curious.
I can give you the link to the article. It's a very good article of Pierce. These are not in your book because this is more current than the book is on Pierce. But I mean, this makes sense. Right now, just read them and think about them, right? I mean, approach things with curiosity and respect because you'll know there are more stories, there are more things involved here. It's very complicated, and so I shouldn't expect to understand it immediately. He uses this word articulating. That means to put it into language. Develop habits and skills of articulating what you think, in ways that enable and encourage others to articulate what they know, believe, think, experience, value, particularly if they disagree with you. So we can say what we believe in ways that do not encourage others to disagree with us, right? How do we do that? You can do it with your tone. You can do it with your volume. You can do it with your facial expression. That this is not an invitation for you then to articulate for me what you believe. This is me telling you the way it is. And Pierce says you better change that. You better learn to say, all right, let me explain the way I see it, and then I'd like to hear the way you see it. Here's the way I see it. You learn to articulate in ways that enable and encourage others, articulate what they think, know, particularly if they disagree with you. Again, we're just going to hit these. I'll send you the link. Someone send me an email, remind me, I'll send the link. Assume responsibility for authoring the stories instead of being authored by stories. What does that mean? That you don't want to let your stories author you. You want to author your stories. What's the difference? I'm trying.
No, I don't know if this is right, but like, let's say like you did something really wrong and you were aware of it. Like let's say, I don't know, this is a stupid example. Like, let's say you took something of someone else's, but you weren't aware of it. Someone could perceive that as like, oh wow, they stole something. But like if you set your story straight, then like you won't be.
Okay.
Like, I don't know if that's.
Yeah, well in that case the story could say you're a thief.
Yeah.
But you accept responsibility for saying who you are in the story. Yeah, you just always remember that you are the one in charge of your stories. That your experiences in life don't have to define who you are now. They don't have to create you. Well, because this happened, this happened, this happened. That's who I am. Of course, that's who I am. Now, I'm in charge of my stories. Sometimes this reminds you, changing your stories and the way you tell those stories. So he wants you to be, this is called agent, maintaining your agentic power. I am an agent. I mean, remember the Matrix was you guys watched the Matrix, or was that before your time? I don't even know. Did you watch it? All right. Smith was an agent, right? Smith was an agent. What is an agent in the Matrix? What's that?
In the movie,
Yeah.
there's a computer program that kept things in balance.
Okay. It wasn't controlled by the program. It ran beyond the program. So it wasn't shaped by the whole story. It could move within the story. So he's saying to you a little bit, be an agent. Don't let the story just run your whole life. You're free to change it, restructure your sense of who you are. So you're free from the Matrix in that sense, he would say. I think in terms of patterns, relationships, and systems, not just specific acts. To realize that anything that's going on is a complex thing that has a history, it has a story behind it, has many stories behind it. So you have a person at work who's really difficult. Well, there's probably a story behind that. And there's probably all kinds of relationships behind that. And if you want to change what's going on, you need to know those stories. You need to tell those stories. They need to be told. To create new patterns. I'm going to stop these. Let me just clip through these quick. You don't have to write them down, like I said. Let me just listening to other people so that they know you've listened to them. Ability to move among perspectives, so see it from their perspective, see it from their perspective, see it from their perspective. Move among perspectives as well as your own. Yeah, confidence. Be committed to having better relationships. I can create better relationships. So you improve it and you participate in making better social worlds. Now Pierce puts this into practice. He has a consulting firm that he works with. They travel to school boards, to cities. They get hired to set up meetings where people who are shouting at each other learn to hear each other's stories and try to create a new way of working together. So he does this. This is done throughout the country. It's the Public Dialogue Consortium, it's called. And he has all the case studies on his website of places they've been and things they've done. All right. So I will stop there. But coordinated management of meaning is a great approach. It's built on the idea of social self and that we've created the mess and we can change the mess. So we'll stop there. All right, we got about 20 minutes left. Let's take some of your projects and begin to think about the possibilities for theories in them. See if I can get this up. No. Work that time. All right, so let's get our groups. Let's just get all of our groups up on the board so we get a sense. Joan, what's your group doing?
Doing communication, PR,
Okay.
communication.
So you're doing a PR firm
PR small business.
Small business. All right, let's get another group, moving across. Samantha, are you in that
We're
group?
doing, it's a small business. It's like a childcare.
Okay.
Communication problems within them.
Among the staff?
Yeah.
Okay, staff. Problems. What else do we got? Who's in the next group? Kate, or Kristen?
I'm her.
You're in her group? Giovanni?
Yeah, we're doing a country club.
Country club? Okay, and what kind of comm issues are you facing?
Well, the members are complaining about the condition of the course, so the manager, and the manager's not really listening, that's one issue.
Okay. Complaints from members to manager. All right, what other group?
Ours is a large corporation,
Corp?
and it's about, well, we don't really know exactly just yet what the problems are, but it has more to do with internal communications
Okay.
and cooperation, I think,
Corporation,
interdepartmental cooperation.
okay, interdepartment. All right, what else have we got? Arthur, what's your
We're doing sorority and Panthers.
party? What would be a problem? Have you identified a problem yet that you're working?
Oh, you can go on.
Okay, we're gonna do like talking about like power struggles and how to like.
Okay, so power struggles. All right, what else have we got? Caitlin, what's your group?
Oh, we said it already, child.
Okay, we did already. We did your group. Haley?
Ours is Tony's band.
Band?
How to make them more famous.
Okay, so it's a PR question. Are you in here, Ren?
I guess you're doing a large corporation, and that's not that stuff.
Okay,
But it was more employee, and I guess in management communication.
management employee. Okay,
Ours was with Wachovia Bank.
bank. All right, I'll just do it here. Bank.
And I guess interpersonal
Between,
between management and employees as well.
And employees, management and management, all.
okay, so, all
Interbank. Communication.
right, bank.
Raw bank.
Interbank. All right, who else we got? Lisa, do you have yours up here?
Communication.
You already, all right. Brian, we got yours?
Yeah, approved, sign plate.
Okay. Mike, you good?
I don't think mine's up there yet. We're doing like
I spoke to.
Oh, you told me already? Okay.
All right. All right, Tony's in. Lisa, Lauren. Lauren's up here. Andrea, you up here? All right. Jason, Tony, you're all up here. Okay. All right. Now, problem is a lot of these are some of the things you're going to have to look ahead for, because we started with mass media ones, and we're moving into towards the group and interpersonal ones. So you're going to have to begin to look at. Let's take this one though, and let's play with the question of the country club and complaints that are going on. Let's just play with this from CMM today a little bit. Let's ask the question of the coordinated management of meaning, what it might say to this. So you've got this going on to this. What is coordinated management of meaning? Anyone can contribute to this. What are some of the things coordinated management of meaning gets us starting to think about with a complaint, with a manager who's not listening to members' complaints?
If the manager's not like responding, the members might think like the managers don't care really about them being members of the club.
Okay, so you have some perceptions of what's going on here. The members are perceiving that the manager doesn't care about them.
Right, because he's not, because I thought the situation was the members are complaining about something and the manager's not doing anything about it.
Right, okay. But, so what, I'm trying to think of what theory we've dealt with that dealt with different people's perceptions. I think. Standpoint does a little bit of that, so that they have a different, so we could ask ourselves, does standpoint have anything to say to us here? So that might be, but I want to, let's try CMM. What are the things we can do in CMM?
How about to try to teach them new ways to communicate amongst one another? It sounds like you're not doing a very good job of communicating.
Okay.
Well, you could look at the content and the speech act.
Okay, yeah, so you can go through the content, the speech act, the episode, the, right, I'm trying to think, it goes from episode to relationship
The self-concept.
to self-concept, which I thought self-concept came